Welcome to the Hot Cage Podcast presented by Cagewell. This is the episode for July 26, 2013. On this week's Hot Cage Podcast, we discuss Chuck Liddell's thoughts on the biggest problem in MMA, the point of a Roy Nelson-Daniel Cormier fight, Miesha Tate's favorite referee, why Rampage Jackson is getting into a boxing ring, or more importantly, why his opponent is, and all the relevant fights for UFC on Fox 8, Johnson versus Moraga. I will do all this with our special guest host. He's the acclaimed and award-winning senior writer for MMAPayout.com, a fantastic and thought-provoking follow on Twitter at Dilettante, and someone who is on the ground at UFC on Fox 8, doing all of that and still making time for the little MMA podcast that could, the mighty and prolific Jason Cruz. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today? It was 85 degrees today, and I still made it inside to catch the UFC on Fox 8 waiting. So it's a great day.
You know, that seems to be the word around Seattle, is that it's a beautiful day and people are spending so much time inside. But, you know, when the UFC's in town, that's kind of how it goes. So before we get going, you are from Seattle. So you are, you know, kind of on the ground, and we'll get to that more later. But I don't want to ask you who the greatest Seattle Supersonic of all time is, because I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. Who is the greatest Seattle athlete, do you think, in history?
The greatest Seattle athlete, that's a good question. I might have to get back to you on that. I mean, as far as, I'm a basketball fan, so I would have to say the greatest athlete of all time would be someone along the lines of Gary Payton. I know a lot of people who are baseball fans would probably say Ken Griffey Jr. No one is saying Alex Rodriguez. But it probably would come down to Gary Payton or Ken Griffey Jr. in my timeline. I'm sure there's probably people back in the 50s from Seattle that might have been just as good, but those are the two.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I'm kind of an all-around sports guy, and not that you were remiss by not saying this person, but it's interesting how the statistics have gone in the history of sports, and things sort of change. Once upon a time, Steve Largent was the best wide receiver in the NFL history. And then Rice caught him, and he seems like he's kind of this forgotten guy, but he was the best ever. So you've really had some great athletes to watch up there. The 70 Seattle Supersonics were amazing. So, okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about this week, so we'll leave Seattle sports behind for a second and get right into the flurry. All right, first up in the flurry. Chuck Liddell wears a suit these days. Well, if anybody wears a suit at Zuffa, it's probably not Chuck, but nonetheless, he's white collar. During an interview with Inside MMA, UFC Hall of Famer Chuck Liddell identified fighters playing it safe as the biggest problem in modern mixed martial arts. Liddell said that he would have fought longer by playing it safe, but he went out on his sword the way it should be. Let me ask you this. Is Chuck right?
You know, I think to a certain point he is. Is it the biggest problem in MMA currently? Of course it's not. But I think you have to put it in the context of what Chuck's position is, and it's with the UFC, and he definitely wants exciting fights. To a certain extent, he is correct that like there are fighters out there who want to get the win. But you look at something like most recently in May, where Junior Dos Santos, even though he was ahead on the cards against Mark Hunt, went for the knockout. So there are still fighters out there willing to take the chance, despite being probably ahead on the card. So definitely Liddell has a valid point, but again, I'm not sure blowing it out of context with it being the biggest problem.
You know, I agree. I think that, you know, we got to sort of figure out what role the guys that are old fighters are going to play for the UFC. So for me, I wondered, you know, Dana this week sort of dispelled some of the conspiracy theories, and I believe that he doesn't engage in that kind of stuff. There's no paying off of TJ Grant. There's no, although this Vitor Belfort stuff's getting a little fishy for me, I did tweet this week that, to Sean Al-Shadi, as a matter of fact, I said, you know, the Vitor Belfort in Brazil thing's been fishy. Now it's kind of getting blatant, because they're looking at him fighting Tim Kennedy again in Brazil. But all that aside, my point that I'm trying to make here is that I'm wondering, do you feel like the UFC sort of says to Matt Hughes or Chuck Liddell or whomever, hey, I need you to send a message for me through the media. Go ahead and get this out there. Or do you think that these guys sort of take it upon themselves, or is it a mixture of both? They're talking about it around the office, and then Chuck Liddell does it in an interview.
I definitely think they are influencers, and they know their role within the company. and whether it's been told to them to go out there and say make the statement, or it's been implied that they should go out there and make the statement that, you know, fights need to be more exciting. The UFC needs to be more exciting. You can't have guys just laying and praying out there. So it's definitely a talking point, I would say. And so it's a little bit of a mix of both, of the UFC saying, hey, let's go out there and make the point to these fighters through these guys, through Chuck, through Matt Hughes, you know, through Forrest Griffin, that, you know, these fights need to be more exciting, and you can't just hold people for the win.
I agree. All right, next up in the flurry, we're going to talk about Nick Diaz. Nick is up to his old tricks. He no-showed a scheduled interview with Michael The Voice Schiavello for Access TV's The Voice Versus. Said Schiavello, who flew from Australia to Stockton on Monday, Nick, you have let your fans down again, and me, a big fan in particular, unprofessional, mate. So, Jason, who's to blame for this, Nick or the people who still put their faith in him?
You know, it definitely has to be the people that put their faith in Nick Diaz. There was an incident that was reported for the weekend of UFC 162 where Nick had texted Dana White saying, hey, I want to come watch the fights, but I don't have a hotel. Dana found him the hotel. Nick didn't show up. So definitely it's the no-shows are a thing to expect from Nick Diaz. So it definitely is one of those things where if you want to interview Nick Diaz, you do it by satellite, so you don't have to get on a plane and not be there. And the thing is, if Michael Schiavello, and I love his interviews, by the way, his one-on-ones are great, but like, could he have done a program where he searches the streets of Stockholm, not Stockholm, but Stockton to find Nick Diaz? So definitely shame on Nick Diaz for being unprofessional.
You know, that's actually a great angle to take. If he would have just taken his camera crew and tried to track Nick down, I think that would have been amazing. Like, if he would have stayed in Stockton a couple days, turned it into a whole thing, kind of the way that the Tito Ortiz, Dana White, Bad Blood thing, they sort of still made a program out of the fact that they didn't fight. Yeah. It was kind of interesting. So I think that there was definitely an approach you could have taken. I mean, listen, you're absolutely right. If you're still putting your faith in Nick Diaz on any level, you know, it's a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me sort of a situation. So if you're still falling for – and listen, I think Nick at his heart is maybe a good guy. He just doesn't – he has the best of intentions when he says what he's going to say. But, you know, they made a joke on Tommy Toehold where they said, you know, Nick Diaz said, you know, when they asked me to do it, I figured I didn't have shit to do that day. And then he goes, and it turns out I did have shit to do that day. So it's kind of funny that, you know –
yeah.
It's like, what do you expect? You know, you can't get mad when you know, you keep going into the tiger cage and you eventually end up getting mauled. So, all right, moving on to some guys that are also, one who's also a headache for the UFC. Roy Nelson and Daniel Cormier have been flirting on Twitter, and it seems like they will get it on. Nelson has re-signed with the UFC, saying he wants to retire with the UFC. I'm sure Dana's stoked about that. He did re-sign him, so. Days after Daniel Cormier drew up a fake contract, which he posted on Twitter, which was hilarious, for Roy Nelson to re-sign with Zuffa and meet him at UFC 166, the bout became official. Now, the second part of this story is what Daniel Cormier plans to do after the fight. According to a report on UFC Tonight, Daniel Cormier plans to ask for an immediate light heavyweight title shot if he defeats Roy Nelson at UFC 166. My question for you, Jason, is while I think this would be an exciting fight, does any of this make sense for Roy Nelson, Daniel Cormier, or the UFC? I mean, it seems crazy that he's asking for a light heavyweight fight, but, I mean, the light heavyweight title has been contested by insane contenders recently anyway, so Cormier seems like a normal, legit guy, but why would you fight Nelson? I don't get the Nelson-Cormier fight, do you?
I don't really get it either. The only person that would benefit from this fight is Roy Nelson, because a win for Nelson would get him back into that heavyweight picture and erase the Stipe Miocic debacle, which happened. If Cormier wins, I mean, it's just a bridge for him to get to light heavyweight, because everybody knows that Cormier doesn't want to fight Cain Velasquez so long as Velasquez is the heavyweight champion, and the win over Nelson would propel him to get to to get to that light heavyweight division. One would be thinking, as far as planning goes, any kind of fight with Cormier and Jones would be maybe 8 to 10 months out, which would give him time to cut that weight in a normal fashion, to get down to appropriately down to 205. So once again, it just seems like it's a bridge to get to where they want to be. I don't know. I guess Cormier and Nelson still have that blood because, frankly, the fight doesn't really make sense on Cormier's level. I mean, it does make sense for Nelson.
And you know what, Jason? I'll take it to another level. It doesn't make sense for Cormier because Nelson is a very good grappler. He doesn't show it, but he's a very good grappler. So best case scenario, you take Roy Nelson down like you're supposed to. You're a high-level wrestler, and then you find yourself maybe in a compromising position from a submission standpoint. Or you stand with him, and he just throws bombs at you all day, and you got to figure out how to get out of the way of him. So I think that a guy like Cormier isn't as clean with his striking, although he's probably better than I'm giving him credit for, as a Stipe Miocic. The thing that benefited Miocic was he kept those bombs away from him because while Roy was on the outside, Miocic was on the inside. Now, Cormier can do that too. He's been in there with Barnett. I just don't see, like you said, there's no upside to this fight, so why risk a guy that really stylistically doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense for you? So I don't know, especially if you're planning on leaving the division anyway.
Yes.
All right. Next up, let's talk about Chael Sonnen. He's re-signed with the UFC. His insane demands, like Dana's Ferrari and what have you, were not met. But he signed a new 5-fight deal. It will see him drop back down to middleweight after his fight with Shogun, win or lose. So obviously there are a lot of fights from out there at several weight classes because he's constantly beefing with guys all over Twitter and what have you. He's got a fight with Shogun. He's still talking shit to Vanderlei Silva as recently as today. So I guess is the move back to middleweight as simple as that since Anderson's no longer the champion, he has a shot at the belt again, and he feels that Chris Weidman's going to keep it? Is that kind of the thinking here?
Yeah, before I get to that question, it's not often I can say this, but I saw Chael Sonnen today, and he looks great. But yes, to answer your question, yes. I think everybody saw sees Chris Weidman as stake. Basically, they see him and think that he can be beat. So you got, but the thing is, it's a competitive division. You still have Bisping, you still have Belfort in that division, you have Mark Munoz in that division coming up. So it's still a competitive division. But yes, I do think the fact that Anderson Silva is gone allows for the UFC to also put Chael Sonnen in position to make another run at the middleweight championship. Because frankly, if Silva was still in that division as the champion, you could never make another match between Sonnen and Silva.
Let me ask you this, and this is something I've been wondering about ever since Anderson lost to Weidman. If Anderson comes back and avenges the loss and gets his belt back, if you're Anderson, do you just vacate the belt, go after super fights, sort of leave the division, or do you go for a trilogy fight? Because at the end of the day, everybody thinks you kind of lost because you were screwing around anyway. If you avenge the loss, you've kind of cleaned the slate somewhat. Everything's kind of equal. And then if you go to a trilogy fight, I don't know, there's more of a risk. So if you're Anderson Silva, Weidman's kind of doing a stand-up thing by giving you the rematch. Not that he has a choice, but do you then okay a trilogy fight, or do you just move on?
Yeah, therein lies a big question because we're talking about trilogies, and we got one coming up this fall with JDS and Kane, and people are wondering maybe that we're seeing too much of these two fighting. Definitely, if Silva wins in December, you could lobby for Chris Weidman, depending on how it turns out. If it's a close fight, Silva wins in the end, then I definitely see Weidman lobbying for a rematch, a trilogy fight. If Silva just knocks him out in the first round, then everybody can dismiss Weidman. You can move on to super fights or whatever he wants to do next. But it'll be an interesting thing what the UFC will do if Silva does win. If they put him back in with Weidman for a fighter was.
Yeah, I think that promotions seem to think the trilogy fights are better than. I think that they just think they have a guaranteed product, so they want to run it back. But for me, I think that interestingly enough, if Silva goes in there and just wipes him out, it starts to become very reminiscent of the JDS Kane fight because they were both one-sided fights, and then so the third one makes sense. I don't know. So I don't want to see a third fight. I just want to see him move on. Honestly, I think that, and I'm going to write a piece on this in the very near future. I think that the best thing that happened that's a byproduct of Silva losing is now it sort of opens up the super fight with GSP again. I honestly think he should fight GSP before he fights Jones because I think that now people think he's beatable. I think that they start to put together a scenario where if Weidman beat him, GSP can maybe beat him even though Weidman's got heavier hands. So I don't know. All right, let's move on to another 185-pounder, promising middleweight Costa Philippou, who's sort of getting lost in the shuffle. Philippou has yet to step foot into the cage in 2013, and apparently he's had enough of it. Philippou said recently, just give me somebody at this point. I don't really give a shit if it's a big name, small name, whatever. So the question is, why no clear plan for the career path to Philippou by the UFC? And at this point, does it fall to Philippou to take to social media and make himself a fight?
How crazy it sounds, as it sounds, the short answer is yes. He needs to do something, whether it's his management knocking on every door, whether it's him taking to social media. I mean, first of all, do you know a guy by the name of Khabib Nurmagomedov? You know what I'm talking about. Khabib.
Yes.
He has called out BJ Penn and TJ Grant. Now, I don't know if Khabib is that good, but he at least called someone out to and made a little bit of waves, made some news. So I mean, definitely, Costas has got to get his agent out there or himself out there and just pick a guy. Whether it's Anderson Silva or Mark Munoz or Vitor Belfort, just start something. Hey, I want Hector Lombard, for God's sakes, whoever. Just go out there and see who's a sensible, reasonable matchup, and try to start something so Joe Silva and Dana White can see and say, hey, well, let's put them on a card and see what they can do.
And you know what's funny? It's one of those situations where they always tell you, shoot for the moon, at least if you fall short, you'll get the stars, because he called out BJ Penn, called out TJ Grant, and it looks like I think he's getting Pat Healy. So Pat Healy isn't a guy, but he's a step from a guy. You know what I mean? Like, he's that guy right there. You beat Pat Healy, next thing you know, you can start making a case that you can fight Josh Thompson, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you beat Pat Healy convincingly, you know, you can fight Nate Diaz. So, I don't know. For me, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, you know, a lot of people are saying Costa should fight Gegard Mousasi, who's been trying to line up a fight with Vitor Belfort. Now there's talk today that Vitor Belfort's fighting Tim Kennedy, which is an insane fight for me. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
All over Twitter, they're saying it's the worst fight Joe Silva's made in a long time. You know what's funny? Talk about conspiracy theories. A lot of people are even saying that Vitor Belfort's fighting Tim Kennedy as a punishment to Tim Kennedy for talking about fighter pay. So, yes. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, that when I first saw it, and I actually was reading it before we got on here, it definitely flashed in my mind is, you know, it's in Brazil, right? So he's heading to Brazil to fight him. I mean, to fight Vitor in front of his fans. I mean, that's crazy. You know, it certainly is. You know, cannot be a you know, the best optimal conditions for Tim. So, I mean, it definitely does seem punitive.
Well, let me ask you this, because I want to get your take on this. If you have a situation where there's a guy who's wildly popular in a certain area, and now we're starting to see that maybe there's another reason why Vitor's been fighting in Brazil. A lot of people think it's because he's, you know, up to the gills in TRT. But so I guess my question to you is, from a business perspective, does it make sense to have a guy fight? Like, if this was Michael Bisping fighting 4 fights in a row in England, or George St. Pierre fighting 4 fights in a row in Canada, and there's really no suspicions about things, does it not make sense from the UFC's perspective to put a guy, have him fight somewhere where he's going to draw the most fans to the arena, or do you just say, all right, you want him to fight in Vegas? I'm going to have him fight in Vegas just so to prove to you guys we're not trying to keep him out of Vegas, or do you just say, well, we're a business here, and it makes the most sense for him to fight in Brazil?
I think it's the latter. I think it does make business sense to put guys who are popular in those regions to fight in those regions. I mean, another good example is Wanderlei Silva in Japan. I mean, when they go to Tokyo each February now, he's been on that card, and it's mainly because of his Pride days, and he's very popular there, and it's a good draw, and it helps that business in that area. Now, obviously, with the Belfort issue, you kind of have a two reasons why you want Belfort to fight in Brazil. One is the TRT issue, and the two is he's huge. He's popular there. So, I mean, definitely the UFC could go, could argue behind he's very popular and we want him in Brazil. They could argue behind that, and obviously a lot of skeptics will say, well, it's also because of the drug issue.
Yeah, but like you said, I mean, so we're gonna have him not fight in Brazil just to prove to you that we're not afraid for him not to. It seems very petty. It seems like something
Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of grown businessmen, not kids. We're not gonna have him fight outside of Brazil just to prove to you we're willing to do it. Seems silly. So okay, up next we're gonna talk about UFC 162. So we'll get to your specialty. The UFC 162 buy rate is out. Preliminary estimates have UFC 162 drawing 550,000. Pay-per-view buys, making it either the second or third top-selling event of the UFC's calendar year. So, taking everything into consideration, which I always think it's funny when people say that, because why would you not take everything into consideration? Was this a good number for the UFC?
It is a good number considering, however, because of Dana White's comments at the post-fight press conference that it was going to do 800,000 pay-per-view buys, it set it up for failure. So if you were to consider outside of what Dana White said, the number 550, because you have Anderson Silva as basically the sole headliner on this card versus a relatively unknown in Chris Weidman. The marketing plan by the UFC was to have fighters, GSP, Rashad Evans, Gray Maynard, be the influencers for the fans. So basically, what you had is you had a press release, you had them saying, yeah, this Chris Weidman guy, he's really good. How much of that can you really use to sell a fight without having the fighter actually out there? I mean, you think of the best-selling fight this year, Nate Diaz, GSP, and a lot of that happened because of Wolf tickets, of the back and forth between the press conferences where Nick Diaz is going nuts or saying this and that and just going crazy, and GSP is trying to keep it under control, but you could tell he's going nuts. So the fact of the matter is, with 162, there's none of that. What you have is we're selling Anderson Silva. He's the greatest of all time, and we got this guy who we think could be the greatest of all time. So that marketing perspective didn't really work. There was not too big of a supporting undercard to help it. So the 550 probably is reasonable. But going back, when Dana White says we think it's at 800, something really went wrong there for them to be that off.
Well, and so a lot of times too, the UFC will kind of keep the highlights of a knockout like that off of ESPN or wherever, so they get the rebuy. Now, are the rebuys? I'm calling them rebuys. What I mean is like the pay-per-view buys after the fact, when someone finds out what happened and then wants to see it. Is that really like a huge tangible thing that an entity like the UFC can kind of count on, or do you really not see that many people go? I mean, you're not going to go from 500, let's say, to 750 or even 600 just on word of mouth. Wow, Silva got knocked out, and a bunch of people buying the pay-per-view, right? People just kind of go find it elsewhere, correct?
Right, and the thing is, while there may be a substantial bump in the rebuys or the replay buys, it's not going to be something where it goes from 550 to 600. I mean, it might go up 10, 15, but it's not going to be a huge substantial bump.
Right. So that's my point. If the idea of Anderson Silva getting knocked out doesn't have a bump in replay buys, then what will? So you know what I'm saying. So if that's not, so like you're saying, if they didn't do their due diligence on the front end to sell this fight properly, they're not going to pick it up when the world got shocked and then everybody wants to see kind of, you know what I'm saying. They're not going to pick it up if it wasn't fight wasn't sold properly or adequately on the front end. They're sure not going to pick it up on the back end.
Exactly.
All right. So up next, let's talk about Miesha Tate. Tate ripped into Kim Winslow during a 7-minute interview with SiriusXM Fight Club, stating, among other things, that there's no way in hell she'd ever allow Winslow to referee another one of her fights. So, Jason, has Tate created a conflict of interest moving forward, pretty much ensuring that Kim Winslow won't ref her fights? And is this fair to Winslow?
It's not fair. It's not fair to Kim Winslow. And the fact of the matter is, Keith Kaiser is back Kim Winslow up in her decision during that Zingano-Tate fight. But the fact of the matter is that Tate kind of puts the ear to the UFC and saying, hey, I don't want to fight if she's going to ref. And so even though the UFC doesn't really pick its refs, there could be a persuasion to not have Kim Winslow ref the fight, ref a Miesha Tate fight. Obviously it would be quite ironic if Winslow were to be the ref during in December when Rousey and Tate meet again. I don't think that's going to be the case. To get to the point, it's not fair for Miesha Tate to call out a ref just because of a call she thinks was wrong.
Well, and in fairness to Miesha Tate and Kim Winslow, I guess, if Steve Mazzagati's still reffing, I don't think calling out referees is what's grounds for getting them to stop reffing fights. Because Steve Mazzagati never has stopped reffing in the last 10 years, and no one's got blasted more than him. And Kim Winslow does take a beating. She really does. They put her in there with big guys. I think that sometimes they really need to, kind of use a little common sense with who they're putting her in there with. But, I don't know. Miesha Tate says stuff like she's literally ruining people's lives. And then I guess Winslow, when she was stopped the fight, Miesha Tate asked her why, and she goes, "Your face is a mess." And Miesha Tate's like, "That's why you stopped the fight, because my face is a mess? Like, what do you think we're in here to do?" So I don't know. While I'm not crazy about some of the things that Kim Winslow does in the cage, I think that, if you got a certain beef, I don't know that you should be taking it to the airwaves. I think there should be channels for you to do this. If you have a problem with Kim Winslow reffing your fights, then you should take it up with the commission. You shouldn't be taking it up with SiriusXM Fight Club if you're serious about it. So, all right. Up next is one of the larger, interestingly enough, stories of the week. It involves Roy Jones, who seems dead set on boxing an MMA fighter. When things didn't come together for Roy Jones to fight Anderson Silva, he went out and found a new dance partner in Rampage Jackson. According to MMA junkie Stephen Moraga, an upcoming unveiling of Bellator fighter Quentin Rampage Jackson's plans with the promotion will likely include a pay-per-view boxing match with former multi-division champ Roy Jones Jr. Viacom is reportedly targeting an end-of-the-year date for the bout. So here's my issue with the whole thing. The only winner I can see here is Viacom, who has a fight more like an attraction that is pay-per-view worthy. So what I'm wondering is that there are a lot of compelling fights that could make money but aren't good for the people involved. First, is this one of them? And do promoters have any responsibility to prevent such fights so we aren't subjected to the Kimbos and the James Tonys of the world in MMA circles? What's your overall thought on this altogether?
Well, I when I first heard it, I was disappointed. The real reason why is because I was a big fan of Roy Jones Jr. in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We forget that he was the best boxer in the world, the best pound-for-pound boxer in the world for a certain amount of years there. And to see him now in basically a novelty fight is disappointing and kind of hurts his legacy. And as far as the pay-per-view aspect goes, I think what Viacom sees here is a chance to name people, Rampage Jackson and former boxing champ Roy Jones Jr. put them together in what's going to be a train wreck, and it'll sell and it will sell pay-per-views. So, I mean, I don't, as far as responsibility goes for promoters, I don't think the promoters see any sort of responsibility. I see, from what I see is they want to put names out there to draw viewers. And what it kind of tells me is they're not sure yet for the Bellator product whether or not it could go on the pay-per-view and get people to buy it. So that's kind of what I see from the making of this particular fight. I don't like these types of fights because you got to over the hill. Well, you got two guys who are probably over the hill, but first of all you got an overhill boxer and a guy who I don't, Rampage Jackson, who is MMA fighter / wrestler now / boxer. So I don't know.
I kind of think Rampage might be biting off a little bit more than he could chew. I mean, Anderson's a serious striker, but Rampage is kind of just a brawler. So I think if he thinks he's going to go in there, I think he could get his face absolutely destroyed by even a beat down older Roy Jones because just of what he knows. So I just think it's a weird matchup. It's funny how Rampage has been crying for guys to stand with him forever in his MMA fights. So he's like, well, the hell with this. I'll just box a guy. But I don't know. Let's talk about legacy for a second because I was watching a thing today, and it showed a fight between Larry Holmes and Butterbean. And I'd forgotten Larry Holmes fought Butterbean. So, when we talk about the end of the careers for these guys, Tyson lost to some guys towards the end, and all these guys sort of never go out the way they want to. Do you really believe that 20 years from now, we're going to remember Chuck Liddell for getting knocked out by Rashad Evans or his prime? Or what? Do you really think that the legacies are seriously that hurt, or do we feel like they're hurt in the moment because we're in the moment of them being hurt? Because do we remember, the Sugar Ray Leonard towards the end, or this guy or that guy? What do you think 20 years from now we're going to remember about Roy Jones? This fight or the late 90s?
I think you make a great point there, and I think that the fact of the matter is it will depend on how this fight turns out, and it would depend on how big of a fan you were of Roy Jones Jr. Because I was a big fan, and if you see Rampage Jackson take out Roy Jones Jr., I mean that's got to say a lot. And the fact of the matter is Roy Jones Jr. has been traveling the globe, and I did go onto YouTube, and he's been knocked out by some mid-card guys, some guys you don't even know about, and it's just been tarnished on his career. And I think it was Antonio Tarver was the guy who set him in motion to start losing.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, and so and not to get too far off of MMA, but if you look at a guy like Manny Pacquiao right now, what will you remember? You'll remember his basically planking on the canvas after Marquez knocked him out. I mean, and I'm not sure how he's going to be what's his legacy going to be after that? Will he be able to make it back to where he was a couple of years ago? Who knows? But yeah, I mean, with boxers, I mean, you had James Toney in a Muay Thai bout in Thailand a couple months ago. I mean, and then just that horrible display in Boston against Randy Couture 3 or 4 years ago. You got guys, and he was once a top heavyweight. And you got these. I mean, whether it's I don't know whether it's a money issue or just a issue you have nothing else to do. You got these boxers just doing just keeping on fighting. Just kind of sad.
What's funny? I think that part of the thing is with the legacy, your fans are always going to remember your good days. It's the guys that don't like you that are going to remember. Some of my favorite things to see are Joe Montana in a Kansas City Chiefs uniform because I know Leonard Marshall's the one that put him there because I'm a Giants fan. So, those are the things that you remember when you don't like someone is, Joe Namath throwing passes for the Rams and things like that. Daniel Tomlinson playing for the Jets. Those are the things that your detractors are going to remember, and they're the ones that are always going to bring them up. So they're the ones that you're going to have to deal with. So I think that Roy Jones is a very confident guy. despite what's happened to him. I just don't think that he quite understands what it's going to do for his legacy if Rampage Jackson knocks him out.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that's a huge, huge thing to have to deal with if you get knocked out by an MMA guy. All right, so let's move on. Speaking of Viacom and Bellator, we'll stick with them. Many believe their best fighter is Michael Chandler. Apparently they believe that as well because they've offered Chandler a 8-fight multi-year contract extension. Bjorn Rebney said he had a long time left on his existing deal, but I just felt like, you know what, he's elevated himself to a completely new level. I'm going to reward what he's done and make sure Mike is part of the Bellator players. The question I have for you about this, Jason, is a simple one. Did Michael Chandler even have a choice here? Because the way that Bellator kind of constructs their contracts and then aggressively sort of, I mean, did Michael Chandler just sort of look at Eddie Alvarez and say, well, I can either re-sign with them or spend time in court?
You know, it's a funny thing.
Or do you think he wants to be a Bellator?
Yeah, you know, I think it's a couple things. You know, one of the things he said in one of these articles here, he felt comfortable with Bellator. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, I hate to make this analogy, but like, you know, he could be the big fish in the small pond. He could be the face of Bellator, along with Askren and King Mo and Rampage. And the thing is, if Bellator promises him, you know, other types of ways to build his brand, where he could be on Spike TV, where he could be on Ink Master, or he could be on all these other programs, and start a career, start his second career while he's still in his first, you know, that's great. Would he get the same thing in the UFC? Probably not, you know, because you've got so many lightweights in that division that are just as good as Michael Chandler. So the fact of the matter is, looking at it on the other side, Chandler skips to the UFC. He's probably going to make a lot more money. He's going to be probably in some bigger fights, more notoriety, better sponsors, but you're a smaller fish in a bigger pond, and you know you have a lot of big sharks and barracudas in there. You know you got Gilbert Melendez, you got Ben Henderson, you got Anthony Pettis when he's not a featherweight. I mean, you got a whole bunch of people in that division. So I just think from Bellator's perspective, good signing because it secures one of your top guys and the champion. And from Chandler's perspective, you know, hey, I think he weighed pros and cons and thought, you know, the grass is not always greener on the other side.
Well, I think that you hit it right on the head, is that what he needs to do is he needs to use this as an opportunity to market himself properly. And if I was him, I would make for damn sure that I'm a coach on season 2 of Fight Master. I would make sure that if you see Bjorn Rebney, if you see Randy Couture, if you see Rampage Jackson, you see Michael Chandler. And I think that, you know, because, listen, they would do this either way just to kind of send a message. But I think if he went to the UFC tomorrow, he wouldn't even be ranked in that division.
Exactly.
Either way, I think it would end up being that way just to send a message like, here's a Bellator guy and he's not even good enough to be ranked. But I think it would be valid. I don't think he would be ranked in that division. I don't think he would be a good enough fighter to be ranked. So for that reason, why not, like you said, if you're going to be the biggest fish in a small pond anyway, at least make the best of it so that when the time comes for you to potentially leave, you're leaving with some more cachet, you're leaving with some more money in your pocket, you're leaving with, you know, you should be, if you're Michael Chandler, you should be synonymous with Bellator MMA. You know, you should be the fourth person people think of when they think of Bellator MMA. And right now you're not. So if you're going to re-sign with them, at least get your money's worth and, you know, and make a splash. Even, you know, you can make a bigger splash in a smaller pond. So, you know, it is what it is. I think it's smart for him. He just needs to play his cards right. All right. Up next, we're going to end the flurry by talking about the house that Braun and Rodriguez built, Biogenesis. Porter Fisher, former employee of Genesis and current whistleblower, ESPN's Outside the Lines, that athletes from the NBA, NCAA, professional boxing, tennis, and MMA were all clients at the controversial clinic, which supplied numerous MLB players with high-end performance-enhancing drugs. You know what I think is the funniest thing about the PEDs is that no one thinks that it would in any way benefit basketball players. It's so easily dismissed. Like, why would a basketball player do that? Like, why would Dwight Howard and LeBron James do PEDs? They look like they do PEDs. So I'm not saying they do, but they look like they do. So to dismiss it that easily, why would Shaquille O'Neal do PEDs? Because his entire game is power. So that's why he would do PEDs. Plus, it helps your recovery. So it's silly to think that they wouldn't do it. So, but anyway, that aside, my question for you is this: where the players who were going to the biogenesis clinic were economically, Braun, Rodriguez. The question is it reasonable to believe that the MMA guys who are on the biogenesis list weren't higher profile guys? Because you would think they would need to have a certain level of economic wherewithal to deal with biogenesis, right? Well, although today I did find out that they were given PEDs to high school kids, which is reprehensible, first of all. I mean, that's like not even, is it enough that it's reprehensible that what you're doing is influencing high school kids? You're actually giving PEDs to high school kids. You deserve to be, punished to the letter of the law. Yeah. So my question to you is, do you think, now Porter Fisher said that there's no more big names on the list, that's why he hasn't brought them out, but does Porter Fisher know who a big name would be MMA-wise? I don't know. So what do you think is going to come down from biogenesis? I tweeted this week that biogenesis, I may have these backwards, but biogenesis is in, I believe, Coral Gables, and the Black Zillions train in Boca Raton.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying. So what do you think?
Is Alistair Overeem still with the Black Zillions?
I think he is.
It'll be interesting to see. And the thing is, I'm not sure when he said no one of interest is no longer on the list. Did he mean you wouldn't know these MMA fighters' names, or you wouldn't know these names because you don't know MMA? It would be interesting just simply because the extent of how many of these MMA guys went to, how many times they went there, how many times they, what did they do there, who paid, that kind of thing. As far as the investigation, will it be uncovered, and who will be paid? Who will eventually, what names will eventually come out? I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if any MMA fighters will be exposed and or punished for. We're under the assumption that they're UFC fighters. They might just be people who want to get into the UFC.
It's interesting. It's funny that people say that the biggest issue that people have with PEDs is the numbers. That's why it's such a huge deal in baseball and no other sport, because there's no records that are getting broken because of PEDs. But, in baseball, in football, I think it's sort of a safety issue. If you got guys up there that are jacked up on PEDs to the gills and they're blasting into other guys, and you're trying to clean up the sport in terms of concussions and things like that, you need to take it a lot more seriously. And this idea of, like, sort of guys get suspended and it's dismissed and you forget about who was suspended, I think is a little reckless on the part of the NFL. So we'll see. Like you said, there may be guys that are trying to make their way up. And Dana White's been very public about the fact that he doesn't think he's responsible for sort of policing this. He does say that he's going to go after guys, but, they're regulated by a different body, and maybe it's their responsibility to go after. Maybe Dana White should just sort of be hands off. I don't know. All right, so I want to get to a risk-reward with you to kind of intro the UFC on Fox 8. But real quick, I want to talk about some fighter announcements and just kind of find out what kind of jumped out at you. These are courtesy of Sean Al-Shadi and his morning report. These are the ones that were announced this week. So the ones that stick out to me are Dustin Poirier and Eric Koch have been, our coach, have been upgraded to the pay-per-view. Mitrione and Brendan Schaub, Pat Healy and our boy Khabib Nurmagomedov. Look at that.
Yeah.
Daniel Cormier, Roy Nelson. What else do we got here? Tim Boesch, Luke Rockhold, KJ Noon, Soteropoulos, Gabriel Gonzaga, and Sean Jordan. So of those fights I listed, which ones kind of jump out to you the most?
I like Eric Coach once was going to fight Jose Aldo for the title. Whatever happened?
Yeah.
I mean, that I thought was interesting. I think, but what happened was the next fight he got knocked out. So anyway, long story short, I think that Poirier coach fight will be an interesting fight. It'll be maybe an eliminator fight, to be honest with you. Mitrione Shaw, they've had I mean, that was supposed to be here in Seattle. Um, it, is this in Milwaukee with UFC 165? Is that the one that?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that? I think that's Mitrione's hometown, or close to his hometown. I'm interested to see how that goes. I fear a hold fest.
Yeah.
Between Shaw and Mitrione, but the Khabib Pat Healy fight is one that I think will be an exciting one. So long, I mean, Healy I thought did well in his last outing. Khabib, he was the takedown machine, and we'll see if his wrestling holds up. So, yeah, those are some interesting fights.
Well, as long as Pat Healy's clean, let's go ahead and give those boys fight of the night right now. I can't wait to see that fight. That's really, really an interesting fight for me. I kind of like the Boach Rockhold fight, although I just can't get excited about a Tim Boach fight, unfortunately. And I can't for the life of me figure out, the Gabe Gonzaga, Sean Jordan fight I like, and I can't figure out what it's going to take for people to stop scheduling KJ Noons for fights. I'm done with this guy, man. I don't know what it's going to take. I think they're expecting so much out of KJ Noons because he was one of these guys that first started training, MMA at a young age, and I don't know. I can't figure that one out.
I mean, that would be one where it might be he has everything to lose kind of fight there for KJ Noons.
Speaking of that, let's get to UFC on Fox 8 in terms of, I want you to let's get started with this by you telling me we're going to do a risk-reward. And on all levels, financially, in the fight game, who do you think are let's say, three guys who have the most to gain at UFC on Fox 8?
Well, I think the three guys are probably in the main and co-main events. Just to run the first three down, and then I'll talk about them. Jake Ellenberger, Rory McDonald, and John Moraga have the best, the most to gain out of Saturday night's fights. Starting first with the guy in the main event, John Moraga. I think if you saw the UFC Countdown show that they did, it was a great little background piece on John Moraga. I didn't know about too much about his background, how he's growing up, how he grew up, how he's raising his kids. I thought it was an inspiring story. I thought it was really well done. And the fact of the matter is, they talk about how he's an exciting fighter. This Moraga Johnson fight, there's a lot weighing on it just to see how it can carry a show, because the lower weight classes haven't done so well historically, and we'll see how he does on Saturday night. I like him, even though Johnson's the hometown favorite. A little bit of me is pulling for him. Rory McDonald, he is. I mean, the reason why he fights in the Northwest is because he's originally from British Columbia. He did have a smattering of fans. One of the funny anecdotes I have from the open workouts is, it's kind of, I don't know if you've been to an open workout before, but like they do have ropes, but the fighters kind of are there walking in around. I walked in a little late. This guy walked by me in shorts and a t-shirt. Rory McDonald. The guy wasn't mobbed by anybody or anything like that, but he was very slight. And one thing about him is that seems like a nice guy, but he plays that bad guy role for some reason, one reason or another. You notice at the weigh-ins, he took the most time to face off. Like he had to stop, he had to take a drink or whatnot. But with a win against Jake Ellenberger, it'll be definitely interesting for Rory to see what he does. Will he fight GSP if GSP prevails over Johnny Hendricks? What will he do? He hasn't said. He said he wouldn't fight GSP, so that'll be interesting. But going back a little bit about financially for Rory, he definitely has that look. They talked about it on the Countdown show, how he has that, he has that marketability, and how he's into fashion and such. He could be someone that the UFC can get behind in the future. As far as Jake Ellenberger goes, I definitely think that his time is now. He is a guy that looked good in his last fight against Nate Marquardt, and he definitely is hoping for this title shot. So as far as that fight, Jake and Rory, it seems like it's taken a lot from the actual main event of Moraga Johnson, because it's Jake and Rory is a little more compelling because it seems that there's a lot on the line in that particular fight.
Yeah, I agree with all three of those guys. I think that, like you said, Jake Ellenberger, what's interesting about him is sometimes you never really get that second chance. And Ellenberger had that push early in his career and kind of got a little sidetracked, and now he's kind of back in the discussion again. And a lot of guys can't do that, so it shows a lot of resiliency on his part to kind of, fall down the ladder and then get back up it. I'm with you. I can't really figure out Rory McDonald in terms of, like, I think that he's kind of has a feeling about him that he's better than it all. And if you're him, you just go, I don't have any respect for Jake Ellenberger. What am I rushing for? What am I going to rush? I'll let that guy wait. So be it. This guy wants to fight me. And then as far as Moraga goes, I mean, listen, I live in Phoenix. I know exactly where John Moraga is from. It is not a nice place to go. I certainly wouldn't go down there, with my family and hit the parks to kind of go spend a day picnicking. So he's from a rough area, and he's legit. And I think that could pose a problem for Demetrius, and we'll talk about that when we get to the fights. But yeah, I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I think that Moraga is now at the point where you realize that this is the shot. This is the chance to kind of make it happen. Demetrius Johnson is kind of a little bit distracted now. He's got a new baby, and as someone who has a relatively new baby, I can tell you that it's very distracting. So I think now's the time. Now's the time for Chicano John to make it happen. So I completely agree with what you're saying. Now, who are the guys with the most to lose?
Yeah, so I'll start off first with John's John's opponent, Demetrius Johnson. I think that Mighty Mouse is going to be the pressure's going to be on. There has been distractions, like you said. He just had his young child. He looked good at the open workouts, but there is always a pressure fighting in front of your hometown fans, and everybody. I mean, he was the guy at the workouts that people applauded the most when they were there, and they loved him. He has an Xbox 360 sponsorship that he's had for the longest time. Probably, I believe, the only fighter that's sponsored by them. He also has a couple other sponsorships that have been helping out with him. So definitely, if he loses, I think it'll be disappointing simply because it'll be in front of the hometown fans. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's the flyweight division, and I definitely see him getting at least a rematch shot. But once again, this is probably his only time he'll be headlining a fight, national television in Seattle. This is the dream matchup. He probably has the most to lose here, most to be disappointed about. Number two is the person who was applauded the second most at the open workouts, Liz Carmouche. It was a little surprising. Probably her and Ellenberger, I would say, got the second most applause. But the fact of the matter is that she was over. She did jumping jacks, the people applauded. She drank water, the people applauded. They were audibly talking to her about, like, you need a title shot, Liz. You need a title shot after this fight. So the fact of the matter is she had that historic fight with Ronda Rousey. If she were to lose again, it would be 2 in a row, and it would put her down the line in the women's division. So that's definitely something she is trying to avoid. Thirdly is a guy that we haven't talked about in a long while, and it was funny because he was one of the first people I was put on this card, and I forgot he was on this card until they announced him at the weigh-in today. Melvin Guillard. He was once a guy who was supposed to rule the 155 division, and he's been up and down. He's been going from camp to camp, and he's been, a guy who you want to get behind, and then he falters, and there's an issue. So I'm saying his fight, if he loses, he could be a guy that could be possibly on the cutting board.
Yeah, and touching on all the ones you just said, I think this is a great opportunity for Demetrius Johnson to make himself sort of, I guess he'd have to compete with Ben Henderson, but he could sort of be Seattle's favorite son if he were to win and sort of have like an iconic moment, almost along the lines of what Jose Aldo did when he ran into the crowd in Brazil. If he has this sort of iconic moment where he wins, and, I'll tell you it would be great. And, I hate pre-made moments and all that, but they happen. I mean, listen, Ben Henderson proposed in the ring, or in the cage, excuse me. I think that if he wins and he brings his kid in the octagon, I think that might be the sort of marketing thing that people will really grab onto, across the board. Now, so he really has an opportunity, like you said, to really market himself properly, start in Seattle and then move nationally. My question for you about Liz Carmouche and the reception she got, is there a huge either women's or sort of LGBT presence in Seattle? Do you attribute it to that, or do you think it's just she's sort of a media darling because of Twitter?
I think it's both. I think Seattle's a pretty liberal city, as you probably know. It has a huge LGBT community, and I think a lot of people, just from being at the workouts and overhearing people, a lot of people have gotten behind Liz, and I definitely think that they love her story. A lot of people are fans of Ronda Rousey too. Don't get me wrong, but I think they do love her story, and they love the fact that she put on a great fight against Ronda Rousey. I don't think she gets this reception if she just laid down and put a dud out there against Ronda. But I honestly was surprised when she came out, and like there were people that were like drew a bigger response than normal. So it was a very, very interesting fact that she was a very popular fan, or here.
Well, she's really played her cards right. I mean, like you said, she has the LGBT community, she has the woman community, she's a veteran, and she probably picked up a lot of Rousey's fans. Like I'll give you sort of a weird analogy. I'm a New York Giants fan, so when everybody asks me what I think about Tom Brady, I'm like, I don't have a problem with Tom Brady because we beat him in the Super Bowl twice. So had she defeated Ronda Rousey, that's one thing, but she put on a good fight, like you said, and then lost to Ronda. So a lot of Ronda's fans are probably Liz Carmouche's fans just because she did fight admirably, lost, and then there's no real reason to hate her. So she probably picked up a lot of people just from the way she carried herself in that whole thing. I think that, like you said, she does have a lot to lose because she's fighting Jessica Andrade, who not a lot of people know. And I said this before when she fought. It's fine that you were one half of the first ever women's fight in UFC, a title fight. What's next? You don't have to win that fight, but now you can't make your fights after that make it look like you had no business being in that fight in the first place. So now she has that thing where she has to hold up her end of her bargain, or she'll just kind of be someone we remember. And I'll talk about that here in a sec. And as far as Melvin Guillard goes, that guy, man, he is I don't know what to make of him. He's got all the tools. I would say that I would switch play. I would say a lot of fighters would switch places with Melvin Guillard, shoulders down, and no fighters would switch places with Melvin Guillard, shoulders up. Yeah. So that's my take on him. I think that beating Matt Danzig would be a nice little feather in his cap. But, because Matt Danzig usually brings it, former Ultimate Fighter winner. I think it's going to be a good fight. I think, and we'll get to this later, I think the preliminary card is looking pretty legit. All right, so let's get to the fight this weekend. It is UFC on Fox 8, Johnson versus Moraga. It's July 27, 2013, Seattle, Washington, Key Arena. It's going to be on Fox, FX, and Facebook, respectively, for the main card, prelim card, and obviously the Facebook fights. All right, so let's talk about this fight card as a whole. The buzz around the internet are that people are saying this card was improperly labeled and put on the wrong channel. It says UFC on Fox, Jason, but most people believe it should be on FX or Fuel. And you know what? My reason for that is it seems to be, for the Fox cards, they have a formula, and I tweeted this out. You put the lighter weight guys as the headliners. You put a huge name as the co-main event to draw the eyes, and people sort of stick around and their eyes get on the lighter weights. Did they fall short or did they overestimate what Jake Ellenberger and Rory McDonald, while it's going to be a good fight, means to the community outside of MMA?
Yeah, I think you're correct in saying that, they did not, either they overestimated or they improperly booked the card if you were looking for a big name in that second position behind the lighter weight guys. It caters to a certain, the MMA community, the diehards, but I'm not quite sure if it's one of these cards where it's during the summer. Not a lot of people. Traditionally, the summer cards are lower rated than the rest of the year because everyone's out or there's other activities going on. But one reason or another, I don't know if a Jake Ellenberger Rory McDonald fight is going to draw eyes to want to come in and watch the fight. Watch that particular fight and stay for Johnson Moraga. I'm not quite sure if they could have put, another, either have Ellenberger and McDonald along with another top mid-tier fight as well. But yeah, I'm not sure if this card would draw as many viewers as like the other UFC on Fox.
Well, it does seem like a good spot for Shogun and Chael. And I know they're headlining the Fox Sports 1 card. It seems like a good spot for maybe Roy Nelson-Daniel Cormier. Obviously, they're further down the road. But that's the kind of fight that draws the eyes. And then maybe, Josh Barnett coming in maybe would help out.
Josh Barnett.
Him against Frank. Yeah, him against Frank Mir. That's the kind of co-main event they need to really – I think it's going to be a hell of a card. I just don't think they're going to bring the sort of eyes. I'm actually thinking this may be one of the lower-rated UFC on Fox cards, and it still might be a good one. So anyway, with that being said, let's get to it. We'll start talking first with obviously the main event. The reigning and defending flyweight champion of the world, Mighty Mouse Demetrious Johnson, steps in there with a young man who looks super focused, motivated on a mission, Chicano John Moraga. What are you expecting to see in this fight, and who are you predicting to win?
Well, I definitely think it's going to be closer than maybe what people are predicting. One of the things that I saw I thought was interesting is the fact that Demetrious Johnson hasn't finished a fight in a long while. All of his fights in the UFC, I believe, have gone to decision. And that's kind of interesting to me. I haven't seen too much of John Moraga, but I think what will happen in the end is Johnson's quickness will get to John Moraga, unless Moraga could get to him in the early rounds. But in the end, I do see a decision for Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah. I kind of want to see Moraga win because he's a local guy, and I like his story, and I do think he's legit. I think you're right. I think Johnson's a little too fast for him, and I did kind of like that Johnson was rocked by John Dodson and still kind of recovered. So it shows me now. I think that Moraga's a little nastier than John Dodson is, and I think if he drops Demetrious, I remember in the fight with Dodson. Remember in the first or second round, Dodson was criticized because he dropped Johnson and didn't follow up, and he said, sometimes you can make a mistake where you go in and, you shouldn't have gone in and you put yourself at risk. I don't think Moraga is going to even worry about that. I think that if for any reason Demetrious Johnson's ass hits the mat, Chicano John's going to be all over him, and that kid's nasty, man. He's out for blood, and I think that if he gets in a position where he can finish you, he's got no problem just blasting you until the ref pulls him off. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and take Moraga. I'm going to take him. Let's go with the third. But I do really think that catching up. I don't think that he's going to stalk like sort of like a Dan Henderson style or a Johnny Hendricks style where he's just looking for that bomb. I think he's a little cleaner than that. But I do think that he understands what you understand in that the longer I chase Demetrious Johnson around, the more it's going to affect me physically. The more it's going to affect my ability to get him, because Johnson can go hard for 5 rounds. Not that Moraga can't, but I just don't think that he can keep the pace that Johnson can for 5 rounds. So if he wants him, he's going to have him early.
Okay.
So, all right, that's the main card. It's going to be a great one. All right, that's the main fight. Up next, we have a fight we've been waiting a while to see. Two guys who are at the top of the food chain, 170 pounds. While the future of the division once upon a time seemed to belong to Roy McDonald, Jake Ellenberger has had a career resurgence and sort of closed the gap. What are you looking forward to seeing in this fight, and who you got?
I'm torn on this fight because although I think that Rory McDonald is the superior athlete and the better all-around fighter, something about Jake Ellenberger and his resurgence kind of has me picking Ellenberger to win in the second round. I don't know if it was just his last fight with Marquardt or what I've been seeing at Jake, but he looks focused, he looks ready, and I definitely think that that can propel him to defeat Roy McDonald. I mean, not to dispel McDonald. One of the things, and also back up a little bit. One of the things that I saw is that Roy McDonald is very slight compared to Jake Ellenberger. Jake Ellenberger is a pretty big guy in that division, in the welterweight division. And so, if Ellenberger can use that against McDonald, that would help as well. I'm picking Ellenberger.
Well, he's the juggernaut, Jason, so he's got to be the most massive, most intimidating fighter at 170 pounds. Well, there's talk of Roy McDonald moving to 85. I seem to think that him and George St. Pierre just aren't destined to meet. St. Pierre kind of bought himself a little bit of time when McDonald was injured, and I just think that this would be another thing that kind of gets in the way of those two fighting, and I think they're not destined to fight. So I think that the one mistake that I can see on the part of Ellenberger is standing with Roy McDonald, because I think Roy McDonald's a lot cleaner on his feet than Ellenberger is. I think Ellenberger's got heavier hands, but I think that McDonald is cleaner. The one thing that concerns me about McDonald is I hope that he doesn't take that fight with BJ Penn and sort of use that to bolster his confidence, because BJ Penn is a shell of who he once was, and at the end of the day, he's a 155-pound fighter. So, Roy was in there, he was doing the alley shuffle, and he kind of, said his part. It's just a technique, and it's a way to kind of distract my opponent, and this, that, and the other. But, he was in there, and he was getting cute. And if he gets cute with Ellenberger, he's gonna have the lights turned out for him. So I think that I'm with you in the sense that I think it's sort of Jake Ellenberger's time. Although I think Rory McDonald, these guys are just, it's an old pro wrestling cliche of the immovable object. And these guys just seem like they're literally on a collision. They're two trains going the exact same speed headed right for each other, and I think it's going to make for a great fight. I just think the guy that gets his game plan, it's the biggest MMA cliche there is, but the guy that can get his game plan going in terms of, I think Ellenberger has to work the wrestling. He has to get on top of him. He has to ground and pound. And if he wants to stand with Rory McDonald just to prove that he can, I think that Rory McDonald's clean enough that he's going to bust his face up and it's going to change the course of the fight. I don't think he's going to hurt Jake. I just think it's going to change the course of the fight. So I'll go with you. I'll go second or third round for Ellenberger. I like that, and I'd like to see Ellenberger fight GSP or Hendricks. Okay, up next we have Robbie Lawler and Bobby Volker. Now, what I think is interesting about this fight is this is where I think that people start to see this card as unfit. Robbie Lawler, once a highly touted prospect, way back when in the UFC. I mean, they were putting a lot into him. He was the Brandon Vera, John Jones sort of next guy. And obviously Jones, lived up to the hype, and Brandon Vera didn't, neither did Robbie Lawler. He spent some time away, but now he's come back with a vengeance by taking out Josh Koscheck in the first round. Now, how you defeat Josh Koscheck and then your next fight's Bobby Volker, I'll never understand. But that's the situation he has in front of him. Now, even, these aren't the names the fans want. It still could be a great fight. So what do you see in this fight, and who do you like?
Well, I think the problem with this fight is that Volker did take this on short notice. I think our guy, MMA Adam Martin, put it succinctly when he said, Volker is a construction worker, going to school, and he picked up this fight on short notice. The recipe for disaster. But with that being said, at the workouts, one of the things I was impressed with was Volker hits hard, real hard, and if he connects on a knee or one of his punches, I think Lawler could be in dire straits. But with that being said, in the end, I think Robbie Lawler gets the victory and starts to make his presence known in the UFC. I just don't think that Volker will be able to connect with any of his heavy hands.
Well, it is a recipe for disaster for Robbie Lawler in that you're fighting a guy who's really got everything to gain and nothing to lose, with heavy hands, on short notice, and you probably think you're a better striker than he is, which you may be, but so you're willing to stand with him. So, it's one of those nights where Robbie Lawler could end up staring at the top of the Key Arena, wondering what the hell happened, and asking the age-old question that TJ and I always joke about to the referee, what happened? If you ask the referee what happened, you know what happened.
Yeah.
You got knocked out. No referee's ever going to go, when you say what happened, you won, and then you just fainted. So it's like what happened. If you're asking what happened, the answer's pretty clear. So I'm with you. I think it's Robbie Lawler's. It's the second coming of Robbie Lawler, much in the way of Jake Ellenberger career resurgence. Chad Mendez is doing it as well. I think that Robbie Lawler is on the come. I wouldn't mind seeing him fight Tarek Saffiedine. I don't know if they have a history. That fight makes a little more sense to me than Bobby Volker does, but it's a short notice fight. Obviously somebody fell out. I can't remember who it was, but
I think it was
it makes for an interesting fight. Was it so? He was originally supposed to fight Saffiedine, and now, I'd rather fight Saffiedine. So we'll see. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to take Lawler early, but I think that Volker puts up a pretty. He's a Kansas City boy, and I think that he may soon be fighting for a Kansas City promotion in Bellator. But I think that he puts up a valiant effort. I think he's a Midwestern kid, and he's going to come in there, and put in an honest day's work.
Mm-hmm.
All right, up next, we have Liz Carmouche and Jessica Andrade. Liz Carmouche was one of the first women ever in the octagon. Saturday night, she begins the journey to prove that she is more than just a footnote to history. She tries to earn her way back into the octagon with Ronda Rousey. The first step is her fight on Saturday with Brazilian Jessica Andrade. This fight is really going to let us know what Liz Carmouche is all about. Is she just sort of happy to be here, or is she gunning for something bigger? So, Jason, answer the question. Is she just happy to be here, or can we expect more? Now, not a lot's known about Jessica Andrade. Does she have enough to take care of Liz Carmouche, or is Liz the real deal?
Well, I think everybody wants Liz to want to be here more than just happy to be here. She want her to be competing again for Ronda Rousey's belt. Andrade is a wild card out there. If you look at some of her fights on online on YouTube or whatnot, she's relentless, and so it'll be interesting to see how Carmouche defends like her wrestling, Andrade's wrestling, and her jiu-jitsu skills. I mean, obviously Carmouche didn't do so well with the jiu-jitsu against Ronda Rousey being armbarred, but we'll see how she defends it. It's hard to say how it's going to turn out. I'm pulling for Liz Carmouche, but something says that Jessica Andrade could pull off the upset.
I agree, and it's one of those situations where, Vitor Belfort and Tim Kennedy aside, this is one of those nights where you maybe find out that, Joe Silva does know a hell of a lot more about MMA than I do. And you start to question these things, and it's like Dana White always says, how can you question a fight before it happens? Because you don't know. And despite what you might think, they're not just serving someone up to Liz Carmouche just to bolster her. Maybe they are, but I don't think so. I think that they know something about Jessica Andrade that the rest of us don't know. And, if Liz isn't careful and hasn't done her homework, she might be having some regrets after this fight. I'm taking Liz. I'm taking her in a second. But I think, like I said, I think that this is an opportunity for Jessica Andrade to put herself on the map, much in the way that Liz Carmouche put herself on the map against Ronda Rousey. So it's a huge opportunity for Andrade, and we'll see. All right, so let's move on to the prelim card. It has the internet buzzing. While the fights aren't necessarily main card worthy, there are a lot of great fights on this preliminary card. I want to know what fights stick out to you the most, but this prelim card kind of, to me, is one of those, there's guys in the MMA world, the Adam Martins, the Luke Thomases. These guys are just prelim card guys. I call them B-siders. They're the guys that want to tell you, all the great songs from a band that you've never heard of, and they're sort of hipsters in a good way. I'm not trying to come down on them about it, but they're prelim guys. They want to know, here's this fight between these two people that you don't know anything about, and it's going to be the best fight of the night. They love calling that kind of stuff. And there's a few of them on here, whether it's Michael Chiesa and Jorge Masvidal, Danny Castillo, Tim Means, Mac Danzig, Melvin Gillard, Darren Cruikshank, and Yves Edwards, Ed Herman, Trevor Smith. Of the fights on the prelim cards, what are the ones that stick out to you the most, that you're most excited to see?
There's a couple. First of all, I think it's funny because Darren Cruikshank, the reason I know him is because he last time he was in Seattle, he leg kicked the guy and knocked him out. So against Doug Jitsu, Yves Edwards, I like that. I like that fight. I like Yves Edwards just in general because he's the only guy that could stand on the scale and eat food and not worry about being overweight. I love that. I love that that side of him. So that's an interesting fight. Michael Chiesa, Jorge Masvidal. For this, I'm not sure. I hadn't checked if Masvidal had made the weight. I know it was over. That will be interesting simply because of Masvidal's concerns about catching syphilis from Chiesa's beard. I think that's interesting. But also, Danzig Gillard for what we've already talked about. You got a former tough winner against a guy who who once thought he was going to be the top of the 155 division. So I think those are three fights that will be out that I will be on the lookout for and in my seat to watch.
We'll end the podcast. We'll do our finish strong. I'll start, and then you can do yours.
Okay.
My finish strong this week is with regards to the lighter weight divisions. What I have to say about the lighter weight divisions is this: they really need to understand and put a huge premium on being the dome. But the reason why they need to make it such a huge deal is because I think in the lighter weight division, especially in the flyweight division, if you're not the champ, then you're not someone who they're looking to market. You're easily forgotten. I mean, I was in Vegas. Joseph Benavidez was right in front of me, and he walked through the forum shops like it was nothing. I mean, he wasn't stopped. No one was looking to talk to the guy. So I think that these guys really need to understand what that belt means. You can market yourself at 170. You can market yourself at 85. You can market yourself at 205 if you're not the champ. At those lower weight classes, you really need to understand how important the belt is and that you need to have it around your waist to truly be fully marketed in the way that you want to be marketed. So that's my finish strong. Go ahead.
Okay, I will have to take it off to the kind of jumping off of yours, Demetrius Johnson. I definitely think that he is a guy that can carry this division, a marketable person in a smaller lightweight division. It's helped that he's a local fighter because he's been able to get that Xbox 360 sponsorship. He's a nice guy. He has a great story and a good background, and I definitely think that whatever happens, tomorrow night, he will be still in the UFC, and hopefully he can be a guy that can carry this division.
I agree. I think he's a sharp guy, and I think that he really holds himself up well for the division. He's never really had any issues. He's a nice guy. He's not kind of overly silly like John Dodson is. He's a straightforward guy. He's funny. He's interesting. What's funny? The first thing I thought when they said that he had a baby is, I'm like, if you're Demetrius Johnson, do you think in your head, okay, who's going to be the first guy that says which one to use the baby after I have my kid and makes that joke? Like, how long before I got to hear that joke?
Yeah,
I was wondering that as soon as I heard him. All right, so Jason, it's in your neck of the woods. Get out there, enjoy the fights. We'll reach out to you for the post-fight for your payout perspective as always. Follow Jason at Dilettante. Read him at MMApayout.com. Follow us at the Hot Cage Daily. Read us at cageball.com. Jason, thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, watch tomorrow. Thanks a lot for having me again, John.
No problem. And as always, this is Ending the Hot Cage podcast, as we always do. Keep your chin down and your hands up.